Joining me now to speak briefly to the United Nations decision on a two-state solution in Gaza and the major highlights so far at the United Nations General Assembly's Joy John. She's a global affairs analyst currently in New York for that major event. First, good to have you this weekend, Joy John. How's the event going so far? That's the United Nations General Assembly.
Thank you. It's good to have you. Thank you for having me. It's been a whirlwind of activities in the last week, and just so happy it's gradually winding down.
Right. Now, the UN General Assembly has overwhelmingly endorsed a declaration advancing a two-state solution for Israel and the Palestinians, aiming to end the Gaza war. How did that conversation go at the United Nations, and how can this two-state solution work?
Honestly, how can it work? I do not see that a clear picture now. It's still blurry on my end. It's a very tough one to answer. You heard from the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It was a tough one yesterday in the hall where you saw a lot of walkouts by delegates. He clearly is resisting the two-state solution, and that has increased his, I would say, diplomatic isolation for Israel. More countries are continually aligning with international consensus. And just this year alone, we saw UK, Australia, France, and other allies, key allies of the United States, tilting towards recognizing Palestine as a sovereign state. Currently, there is a delegation at the UN on observer status. They do not have a voting power, but the crux of the matter here is that no matter how many countries endorse Palestine for its independence as a sovereign state, full UN membership would require approval by the Security Council, or I would say where the US has a veto. So that's where it's a bit gray at this moment.
So for now, we cannot say that is workable. But I mean, in the course of time, right, if that decision is, like you did mention, is approved or taken by the Council or the Security Council, how would that escalate this war?
Well, we can't really tell. I try not to go with permutations, especially in serious conflicts like this. You just have to watch how things unfold. But again, never say never. With diplomacy, anything is possible. With all the tension, with all the talks, it's unpredictable.
Right. So now let's move to some of the major things happening at the UN. What's the United Nations saying about artificial intelligence? I know that that's one of the topics that's, leading the cause in the, event that's ongoing in NY. So give us details with regards to that.
And you're right, it was one of the key topics raised at UNGA80. But I will say the regulating AI is a multifaceted approach. When we heard leaders and all the talks about AI governance, the whole thing is geared towards creating a framework for AI governance to regulate the risks, if any, and opportunities, echoing the need for inclusive oversight and governance. And why do I say that? When you talk about, let's say, people worry about threats for their jobs, what is AI going to do? Does that mean I'm not going to be employed or it's going to take over my job? I don't see a threat, Olije. I see more about job transformation. I see where companies or corporations and organizations now have to invest in training. That way there, I would say, many areas that AI can serve to benefit nations if it's used properly. The president of the UN General Assembly made a clear call about the regulation and the safeguarding measures to ensure that AI was used to benefit and not to deprive like developing countries of what the maximum it can bring. So if it's done without safeguards, I think it poses a risk of exacerbating inequality among the member nations.
I mean, you literally answered all the question and some of the things I have to ask about AI. But then again, I'll ask you the question about the benefits to nations. A lot of people watching this would want to understand how is it going to benefit nations and how can AI be regulated? There's much of the talk about AI being, very, very beneficial and all of that. But those are the questions. How can it benefit nations and how can it be regulated?
For instance, a common task that you do, Lijay, now we have AI. Even communicating with you here is AI. It's just something that hasn't really come, or that hasn't wasn't blown up in that way. It's been around for a while. There's so many things. When I talk about training, you can do less with the use of AI. You can get several tasks done with the use of AI, but it has to be done properly. There has to be a framework of governance around it so that it is not abused, again, or depriving, I would say, developing countries who are just catching up to data and then AI of the service that AI brings to the table.
Now, let's move to another conversation that's quickly taking center stage at the United Nations General Assembly is the issue of global food crisis. Help us understand the global food crisis conversation at the United Nations and what is the way forward as recommended by these nations.
Absolutely. Well, Olivia, you know that in tackling any issue, you have to identify the root cause. And what do we have here? Conflict and instability. Look at places like Gaza, Sudan, Yemen, and the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. We've seen what it's done. So I think we can, for context, we can draw examples from these countries that have mentioned and seeing what has happened. But based on the discussions and the initiatives at UNGA80, the session of the General Assembly, the path forward involves a multi-pronged approach. It will be a combination really of humanitarian efforts and leveraging the sustainable food systems to build a long-term resistance. We also talked about an impact. Most times the UN wants to take aid into a place, but then they are resisted. So there has to be like a teamwork, and that's one of the calls they made on the floor. So when you look at how to tackle it, saying it is one thing in New York, but implementing it and creating a pathway for those on ground, the boots on ground, to get in there and give food, empower women is another topic.
Right. And finally, before I let you go, climate change has been a major topic on many global platforms, events, if you talk about the G20 and all of that. Now, are we ready to divert to non-fossil fuels, talking about these nations gathered at the UN summit? Some governments aren't ready to engage with these ideas because, the issue of corruption and how much they are benefiting from, fuel, fossil fuels. So are we ready to make that change? What are the conversations like in the United Nations General Assembly? I know that's one of the major topics as well.
Absolutely, you are so right. That was one topic on our minds and our talks. The world leaders, what I mean, I was in the room, I was in the hall on many of these sessions and the talks, references from heads of states and prime ministers. But, while the move to non-fossil fuels is attainable, I don't rule that out. I think the real question here is how many of these governments truly want this transition into fossil fuels? How many of them are willing? It's one thing to talk on the stage in New York. It's one thing to go back home and be receptive to the change. So how many of them are ready? In such cases, you'll find that vested interests, what would say the cabals in the system, will work to slow the pace of change. And I think this is why it's very important that trust and accountability remain the key currencies for any meaningful transition for government. So we'll, again, watch to see who's receptive, how they implement it, and then we can come back next year and dot all our I's and cross all our T's.
Right, absolutely. Looking forward to that. Our fingers are crossed. Thank you so much, Joy John, for joining us on The World. She is a global affairs analyst.